This is Studio 809.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Outdoors with Hiking Bob podcast. I am your host, Hiking Bob Falcone, and you can find me and anything you want to know at my website at hikingbob.com. And there's links there to my columns at the Colorado Springs Independent, my other podcast, my photography website, and also you can link or you can email me or subscribe to my newsletter. And I highly recommend subscribing to my newsletter. It comes out on the weekends, Saturday, Sunday, usually Sunday, sometimes Sunday. And usually there's follow-ups to stuff I may have talked about on the podcast or my column, or there's just other news that's outdoor recreation related, as opposed to another daily newsletter that comes out that typically features things not related to outdoor recreation, despite what their name is. They feature things like bar fights. Interesting, but not an outdoor recreation thing. Anyway, we stick to outdoor recreation and how it affects things. And usually, a lot of times, and I'll admit, a lot of times it's links to other news stories, but I typically put some context on there. Why am I talking about this? Why is this in my newsletter? So you add a little context to why I'm even including it. It may have a relation to my column that week or my podcast that week or something. So anyway, that's all enough about that. Hikingbob.com. Click there, find anything you need to know, and also contact me if you have any questions, comments, suggestions. Some of the last podcasts we've done have been based on suggestions from listeners. We love getting suggestions from listeners. They've been some really good podcasts, too, so enjoy that very much. So hit me up there. Joining me today is my co-host, Kevin Wild Westendorf.
Hey everyone, it's Kevin Wild Westendorf, and you can find me on Facebook and Instagram at Wild Westendorf, and on my website, wildwestendorf.com, and it feels great to be back.
Nice to have you back here, Kevin. So, we're going to catch up on some things first before we hit the topic of the day, but it's fall color season. I just spent 2 weeks in two different places, most of 2 weeks in two different places, engaging in the fall colors and looking. It's been a banner year for fall colors here in Colorado. It's been very warm. We're recording this on Monday before it goes out, and I was out hiking in the afternoon, and it was 80 degrees. And warm weather, that's good and bad. The bad part is we haven't had any rain in a while. So while the fall colors are great, they're starting to fall because they need the moisture, and they're not getting. We haven't had a measurable amount of rain in several weeks, I think.
Oh, it's been a while.
It's been a while, yeah. So anyway, I was in Salida over on the, I wouldn't say the western slope. It's still this side of the mountains, but in the valley there. We were camping there for about a week and got to do a little bit of hiking, not much hiking, because I was taking pictures of the fall colors. I did do about a 5-ish mile hike. That was pretty nice.
Okay.
But the rest of the time, it was just like, I need to go out and take pictures of fall colors. We were there about the same time last year, and almost to the day. And last year we were early, so I did a lot more hiking because the colors hadn't changed. This year we were nailing it. They were just hitting it, so they were about a week early this year than they were last year. And then I came back for a couple of days, and then I went. So I was with my family that week, camping in Salida. Then we came back, and then I went by myself over to Montrose on the other side, so the western slope, which I haven't been to in a while. I was there in August for a little bit, but I hadn't been there in years, visited the Western Slope, and the colors out there were outstanding. Now there I was hitting, in some areas, the tail end of it. So like the $1 Million Highway, Highway 550 from basically Ridgeway down to Silverton, most of that had already gone to peak by the time I got there. Probably missed it by just a couple of days. But then there's some other places I did, specifically a place called Owl Creek Pass.
Oh, I've wanted to go there for the longest time.
Oh, my God, was it gorgeous. I mean, it was, and I was just there on Friday, this past Friday. I came home on Saturday, and I spent the entire day out there, and the fall colors were thick and rich and beautiful. And so it was a productive day. And I've been posting pictures slowly on my website. As a side note, I bought a new camera about 3 months ago, and it is a higher megapixel camera. So I was running about 24 megapixels, which is fine. It's plenty of megapixels. People, get hung up on megapixels. But I bought a higher megapixel camera, 45 megapixel camera. mostly because some of the stuff I do, you have to crop in the picture. And this is getting a little technical, but I'll get past it real quickly. So when you crop in and you're not working with a lot, you lose a lot, if that makes sense. Yeah. So a lot of times when I do my flower pictures in the spring or wildlife, sometimes that's a really distant thing, even with a big honking telephoto lens. So you crop in, you need those extra megapixels. And the camera was on sale. I got a great deal on it because they were just coming out with a new model, which I knew that and upgraded, but that's okay. The other one was fine. The problem is those files that come out of that camera are huge.
Oh, I forgot about that part.
So basically a megapixel is a megabyte. So we're at 20, and I shoot in RAW mode. So a 24 megapixel raw image is about 24 megabytes. Well, they're 45 megabytes each. And then when I load them in my computer and I edit them, I've had some of them in JPEG, which is a condensed format. They're 80 or 100 megabyte files.
Oh, wow.
They're huge. So it takes forever to process because even though I have a fairly new and pretty powerful computer, it takes a little bit of time to process those pictures. So, and I shot hundreds of pictures over the 3 to 4 days I was there, plus the week before in Salida. So anyway, I'm getting the pictures out there. It's beautiful. You went and were chasing some fall colors. Tell us about what you did.
Yep. So about a month ago, I made a reservation to take the shuttle to the Maroon Bells from Aspen. And we picked a weekend that usually is the peak weekend for the fall colors, but just with the lack of rain and all that, the colors are going by really, really fast. So on Sunday, I got up at 2:30 in the morning, got ready, drove to Denver, picked my friend up, and then drove to Aspen over Independence Pass.
That alone is a long day.
Oh, yeah. I left my house around 3 o'clock in the morning, and I didn't get home till about 7:30 because of the Sunday traffic and all that.
Oh, so you went out there that early and came back?
Yeah.
You didn't even stay out there?
No.
Oof. Okay.
Yeah.
Oof.
I am still tired.
Oh, yeah.
And we got to Aspen. We took the shuttle. It's actually a really nice, convenient service. And parking is a little expensive, though. It was $40.
Oof.
Yeah, so
that's all day, right? 24 hours?
Yeah.
Okay.
So that was a bit more than I'm used to. But the shuttle ride's about 20 minutes.
That's almost Manitou Springs prices.
Yeah, that's true.
I couldn't help it. Sorry. Long story. Couldn't help it. Almost an inside joke. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Kevin. Sorry.
Oh, it's all good. Yeah, it's about a 20-minute ride, and of course there's the voiceover on the intercom that tells you about the sights and sounds along the way. And we got there, and for some reason, the fall colors over Independence Pass and Aspen were still very vibrant and strong. When we got to Maroon Bells, you could tell most of the trees have shed their leaves. There's still patches of beautiful gold colors. There were some shades of orange and red mixed in too, and those areas were gorgeous, beautiful. It was a bit of a bummer that we missed the peak season by about a week or so.
Last year, if you went by last year, you probably would have hit it at peak.
Oh, yeah.
Everything's about a week early.
Yeah, and but still, the Maroon Bells, to be there in person, it's just stunning. It's incredible. It's just, they're known to be the most photographed mountains in Colorado, and the pictures still don't do them justice. It's until you see them in person. So it was still worth the trip and the really, really long day. I want to say, yeah, the drive home was obviously a lot longer because of Denver traffic. But yeah, it was worth it. And me and my friend, we started a fall colors leaf peeping tradition now.
Okay.
So this is our third year in a row now. So we plan to explore more parts of the state. So
cool. So for people who aren't familiar, if you're not from Colorado, you would recognize a picture of the Maroon Bells if you saw it. Typically, there are these big mountains with a large lake in front of them. And people, how many photographers were there when you were there?
Oh, like not hundreds, but dozens. With huge cameras, with telephoto lens and all that stuff.
Tripods.
Just lined up against the lake. Yeah.
I shot the maroon bells at fall, and it's a popular fall colors thing because you have this big lake with these beautiful mountains behind it. Now, because we're having such a warm winter, or fall, usually there's snow on the mountains by now.
Oh yeah,
and I'm guessing there was no snow up there.
There was some, like a dusting in some parts, but that's it.
On the western slope where I was, and there was a popular picture of Mount Sneffels. No snow at all. There wasn't a flake of snow to be seen. But for people wondering where this is, you would recognize it. A picture of the maroon bells if you saw it. It is this big lake with these beautiful mountains, typically by this time of the year snow-capped, not this year, and they have aspens in front of it. So you have a lake with this, if you get it lucky with no wind, a beautiful reflection, and then these aspens that are reflected in the water, and then the mountains that are reflected in the water. If you get the right conditions, it's a beautiful picture. You would recognize it if you saw it, for people not familiar with what we're talking about. It's a beautiful spot.
Oh, yeah, and if you decide to go, I would recommend getting a reservation as early as possible, or as early in the day as possible. Because when we showed up, our reservation was at 8:15 in the morning, and it was fairly chill and calm in terms of crowd size, like just not a lot of folks there. By the time we left, which was around noon, there were hundreds of people, hundreds.
I guess by 8:15, most of the photographers had probably been there and gone already.
Oh, yeah.
Or we're leaving pretty quickly. We want to be there before sunrise and catch the sunrise. When I shot it, and it's been some years, same time of year, there was 6 inches of snow on the ground. It was about 10 degrees outside.
Oh, wow.
Snow on the peak, and it's been a few years. And at that time, you didn't need the shuttle. We were able to drive in, and we got there super early. We were able to get a parking place. But there was a picture taken that morning by a newspaper of all these photographers lined up around the bank of this lake. Yeah. And the tripods were so tight together, they were intertwined. It would have been like dominoes. If somebody knocked over a tripod, there's going to be about $500,000 worth of gear in this lake.
Yeah.
It's a very popular spot. I haven't shot it in years. And the one time I did shoot it, my pictures, it wasn't a great sunrise. We had bad conditions. Pictures were nothing to write home about, but it was fun to be out there. I get why people shoot it. I also know that everybody shoots it. That's why I went looking for something else.
Yeah.
So that was cool. So have you done any other hiking? I know you got a new job, so you're kind of getting used to that and getting into that groove, and having an alarm clock wake you up in the morning. Have you done any other good hiking or anything?
No, but I hinted at a huge hike I plan to do.
Right.
The last time I was on here. I haven't had a chance to do it because I have irregular days off, and it's just with other stuff planned and the weather. Like it just seems like every time I've had a day off and I'm free to do a huge hike, it's raining. But I'm aiming to do it this week or next week, finally.
Okay. And for people wondering about the fall colors, the aspens in the high country are changing, and aspens grow above, I think, 7,500 feet. So you won't find many of them here in Colorado Springs. But my current column that just came out in the Independent this past weekend, I wrote about the other fall colors in Colorado that are not aspens and where to see them. And today, just before we started recording this podcast, I was hiking up in the Bear Creek area, up High Drive, and those fall colors I wrote about are coming up there, and it is beautiful. It's not the big, we don't have the big towering red maples here. We have the Rocky Mountain maples. They just go from green to a lighter shade of green, and they're very small leaves.
Yeah.
But we have oaks, and we have some sycamores, and we have some maples, and we have a lot of other cottonwoods and other shrubbery that changes color. Even the scrub oak, which tends to turn like an ugly brown, but if you catch them right. So there is a lot of fall colors happening. So I'll have a link in the show notes to that column that's out this week at the Independent about where's some other place to go. And that will persist here in town for a couple of weeks. If we get some rain, it'll actually be okay. And there's a lot of trees here. For an interesting side note, Colorado Springs, known as a Tree City, USA city, actually when it was first founded, when the first stake was drove in, and Kevin, you've seen the picture, not a tree to be seen. So every tree in this town was brought in here and planted here. And it's amazing how much tree cover there is now. That's pretty cool. Anyway, so good. You got to go out and you got to see some fall colors. You said Independence Pass, which is one of the most beautiful places.
Oh,
The east side of Independence Pass, especially.
Yeah, it was beautiful drive. I forgot how nerve-wracking the drive is because the road gets very narrow in certain parts, and there's like hundreds of feet of a drop-off on the side, and then you see the guardrail in certain areas that are heavily damaged. And I'm just like, man, that is one road you do not want to mess around on.
And there are some places where there is no guardrail.
Yeah. So, but it's a beautiful drive, and if you don't know, at the summit of the pass, there's a large area at the park, with bathrooms, and then there's like a few small trails up there and stuff. I'm trying to remember how many miles it is, but it's not a super long drive to get across the pass, though.
Yeah, and a couple of things about Independence Pass. The west side of it, before you drop down into Aspen, is very narrow, very windy. So large trucks are not allowed up there. You're not allowed to bring a trailer up there. You can't bring RVs up there because it's just... And there's rocks actually overhanging. So if you go through there with anything too big, you're going to take the top off of it.
Oh, yeah.
And the turns are very tight with guardrails, so there's like no leeway. And they close Independence Pass for the winter. So in a couple of weeks here, I think, when does that usually close? By the end of October, I think.
Okay.
And it's going to depend. They're going to look at the weather and see what the weather is. If the weather's going to be good, they'll leave it open as long as they can. They close Independence Pass, and it doesn't open until sometime around Memorial Day. Which, if you want to go from here, Colorado Springs, to Aspen, the quickest way is typically go, out on Highway 24 and then jump over on Independence Pass and go up and over and you end up in Aspen. But in the winter, it's a very long, like you did, you went up to Denver, then came back over Independence Pass. Otherwise, you'd have to go through Glenwood Canyon, hope there's not a wreck and the canyon is closed.
Oh, yeah.
And then come down through Glenwood Springs and Carbondale, and that's a long drive too. So... it's cool that it's open, and you can see why, when you drive it, you can see why they close it, because there's no way you're going to get a snowplow up there.
Oh, yeah.
And even if you could, there's no place to put the snow.
Yeah,
so
yeah,
it's just
true.
like you're just stuck there. So cool. Kevin, there's been a thing that's been going on. It's been in the works here in Colorado Springs for way too long, and everybody will admit this is taking too long to do, and that is electric bicycles. They're out there. We all know they're out there. We own one at our other place in Phoenix because we bring one car. So having an e-bike seemed like a good way to get around for local stuff while one of us has the car out because, we don't drive two cars down there. It just,
Oh, yeah.
Be kind of crazy. But, and getting e-bikes out on trails, do we allow them on parks? Do we allow them in trails? And then we have the TOPS program, which is a special tax that's set aside for buying open spaces and maintaining open spaces. And up until September, I was on that committee, and I was term limited. I had to leave. And that has its own restrictions on what can be allowed on open space properties. And, basically said no motorized vehicles or no motorized use. There's different language in different parts of it. So the city has been under some pressure to develop some kind of policy where you're going to allow e-bikes. Now, some parks, like across the highway here from us, is Palmer Park. That's not a TOPS property. It's just a legacy park. The city could have just passed a rule saying we're going to allow e-bikes up there. But they wanted a uniform policy all over town. And there are different classes of e-bikes. There's Class 1. And I'll go over them real quickly. Class 1 e-bike is pedal assisted. So it's got a motor, but unless you're pedaling, it doesn't go anywhere. It's not like you can get on a turn a throttle or press a button and it takes off. You have to pedal it. And it has a maximum speed limit of 20 miles an hour. Then there's a Class 2 e-bike, and that actually will operate whether you pedal it or not. So if you're not pedaling, it will it'll go anyway. And I just want to bring up I have the copy of the presentation here real quick that was brought up. If you're not pedaling it, it will, I think it still has a maximum speed of 20 miles an hour. Let me just make sure that's correct. Yes, so a Class 2 e-bike is an electrical assisted bicycle equipped with a motor that provides, and I'm reading the definition, assistance regardless of whether the rider is pedaling, but it has a maximum speed of 20 miles an hour. And these are standardized U.S.-wide definitions of these class of bikes. And a Class 3 is an electrically assisted bike that you have to pedal, but has a maximum speed of 28 miles an hour. So which bikes do we allow on which trails? Where do we allow them to go? Do we allow Class 3 e-bikes? And everybody across the country, whether it's the U.S. Forest Service, the National Park Service, the Bureau of Land Management, whether it's Colorado State Parks, whether it's Denver City Parks or Douglas County Parks or El Paso County Parks, everybody's got different rules. And it's a pain in the butt. And when you're here in Colorado Springs, where you're trying to establish a policy for the city parks, and you have two separate rules because we have Tops properties, like I mentioned, that they come with their own rules. And then within the city, you have a county park, Bear Creek Park, which is within the city limits, but it's a county park, so it follows their rules. And then you butt up against the National Forest, and they have different rules. And then you can take your bike down to Cheyenne Mountain State Park just down the road and eventually be on a trail that connects the city parks to Cheyenne Mountain. They have their own rules. It's a pain in the butt. So what they've developed is, and I'm going to basically touch on this pretty briefly. And then to make things even more complicated, and I should add this in here, the state of Colorado implemented a law several years ago that said no city was allowed to ban e-bikes any place that they allowed bikes.
Okay.
So then that's thrown into the mix. And then none of this applied that if you were a handicapped person and you needed an electric mobility device, none of this applied to that because, of course, you can't. That's the ADA rules and stuff, and everybody understands it. That was that anyway. Now you do have to get like you do for your car, if you want to park in a handicap spot, you had to get either a license plate or a hang tag. You had to apply for that and get it. You had to get the same thing for your electric mobility device. That you had to show some documentation that you needed it. Somebody complained about that one. I was saying, well, it's no different than your car. You just don't go and get a handicap plate. You have to show a need. Mm-hmm. But in any case, so you have that in the mix. Of course, that's going to be allowed no matter what. We have to allow that. That's the law. And it makes perfect sense. So they're developing this policy where they're trying to make it so that we can allow these in there. They presented this to the TOPS program in September, when I was my last meeting, that this was coming. In October had a formal presentation, and then it was presented to, or will be presented to, the Parks Advisory Board. I think that's the day after this podcast comes out. And then next month it'll come back to them for actual record. So when they pass when those boards and committees have to make an actual recommendation, it have to be two presentations. One that's a presentation, what we call a presentation item. Here's what we're doing. They get feedback. The department might make adjustments, and then they bring it back the following month where it becomes an action item, which means that now there's going to be a vote on whether to do something with this. You're going to like it, you're going to take it, you're not going to accept it. And then from there, of course, we're governed by an elected city council and a mayor. They have to have, because they're the elected officials. We're just volunteers who are appointed. Your elected officials are the final say in whether, what the policy is going to be. So it's been complicated to deal with. And plus, then the state also passed a law that said those little electric scooters, which I hate because they get left all over the city. Oh, yeah. There's two in my neighborhood right now that if they don't get picked up, I'm throwing them in a dumpster. Come get me, Lime. I don't care. Pick up your crap. Because people ride them till the battery runs out or their money runs out, and then they just leave them wherever. They cannot be subjected to rules more strict than e-bikes. This is according to state law. So we have state law to deal with. Regardless of what we want to do, the state says you got to do this. And then, thinking ahead, and I will tell you that the staff that's been working on this and a committee that's been working on this thought of, I think, almost everything. Now, somebody's going to think of something, but they even said that you can't... Let me take a step back here. When this was first discussed a while back, I said that we would need a vote of the people to change the TOPS ordinance because the TOPS ordinance said no motorized vehicles. That was because, the city attorney at the time agreed that would be necessary, but part of it was because we didn't have this big list of definitions.
Oh, okay.
And the city went further and defined that. So my argument was that if you just change the thing to allow motorized vehicles, you were going to allow anything. And if you tried to say just e-bikes, well, what's an e-bike? We needed definitions. Everybody was in agreement that we needed definitions. We need to have some kind of definitions of what these vehicles were. This way you can't take a 30 horsepower scooter with an electric motor and start riding that around the park. Nobody wants that because we don't allow motorcycles in our parks or in our open spaces. So you had to come up with something like that. So they thought of everything because they said, well, for it to be an e-bike, the one thing is it had to have operational pedals, which means that you couldn't buy like some motorized thing and weld a couple of fake pedals onto it and say this is an e-bike. They really thought of a lot of stuff. So basically, and it's still not over for the Tops properties because some of those were bought with money from outside donors or outside agencies, which have deed restrictions that may say that you can't do that. Yeah. But first, we have to get an ordinance that says we can do this, and then we have to work with these agencies to adjust the deeds to allow it. So there may still end up being places where e-bikes are not allowed because there's deed restrictions. Those deed restrictions may predate when the state changed the laws. And this is the case of unintended consequences, where the state changed a law or made a law and gave the cities and counties very little leeway to make any changes or adjust their policies. So what's coming down the road is in the November TOPS meeting and then the Park Advisory Board meeting, there's going to be an action item to make recommendations on whether to approve these things. It's a very long and complex thing. I'll see if I can find where that's online or a link to where people can go online and read it through.
Okay.
So do I like this policy or not? Well, now that we have definitions, my big objection that this had to have a vote of the people, I pulled back on a little bit because now we've clearly defined what these are. We have a state law that says we have to do this. So how do we fix that? We can't just ignore the state law. The state says you have to allow these where you will allow these. So we have to make a policy. We have to do something. We do have this conflicting thing with the TOPS ordinance and the TOPS program, which says motorized vehicles. So this specifically says that these very specific devices, very specific, scooters, these definitions, these bikes fitting in this definition. By the way, it's only going to be class 1 and 2 bikes, no class 3 bikes. This is what count. These are not described as motorized vehicles based on the state law, based on federal regulations, things like that. That now kind of meets that. Now, and I will tell you that there's already people who are saying they're against this. But in my opinion, they don't want anything. They hate bikes anyway.
Oh, yeah.
So if they had their way, there wouldn't be any bikes out there. Because they've had one or two bad encounters, so all bicyclists are terrible people. I can tell you that's not the case. I've been seeing increasing better behavior on bicyclists, and you and I have talked about before.
Yeah.
There's a lot of hikers out there who do really shitty stuff.
Yeah.
And there have been even some equestrians that we've had some issues with at state parks, being where they're not supposed to be. Nobody has the high ground, the moral high ground here. So the hikers who point fingers at cyclists also happen to be sometimes the same hikers who are out there with their dogs off leash where that's not allowed, or they're cutting shortcuts between paths, between trails and stuff like that. So, spare me. Are there bad cyclists out there? Absolutely. I ran into one the other day, but I'm seeing more and more better improvement. And now we're also trying to build parks with separate biking-only trails.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
One comment that did come out of the TOPS meeting was, well, we need more hiker-only trails. The e-bikes are coming. We have to let them. That's going to increase usage, not necessarily increase danger. I will tell you that you can go faster than 20 miles an hour on a regular bicycle.
Oh, for sure.
I can tell you about me getting stopped ripping out of Palmer Park many years ago coming downhill. Not only was I going way over the posted speed limit for cars, but I passed two of them on a double yellow and got stopped by a cop.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a long story. Didn't do that anymore. So that happened. So there's some myths out there that these e-bikes are going to be faster than a bike. Well, if you're a class 1, it only goes it assists you when you're pedaling. So if you're going up a hill and it's a hard uphill, you can kick that thing in. And so as you pedal, it kind of gives you a boost to get up there. It doesn't necessarily go any faster. And you can go faster than 20 miles an hour on a regular bike. Seen it happen. Ask, what's his name? Armstrong.
Oh, yeah.
Didn't win the Tour de France by going less than 20 miles an hour.
No.
Right? So, anyway, I'm trying to keep this in context. E-bikes are here. They're already out there on the trails. We know they're out there on the trails. We're trying to set up a policy so that we can regulate them and govern them without being overly onerous. And I say we, the city. I'm no longer part of this thing. I'm an outsider just like everybody else is. But I've been, in the last 6 years, this has been coming up on our plate every once in a while. There's some people said we need to vote on it, but of course they want everybody to vote no, so they don't really want it. They don't, the voting thing is a smokescreen for some. I was there because on the voting on it issue because we didn't have definitions. So what we were going to allow, what we were not going to allow. I didn't want a floodgate to open. I didn't want it to be the law of unintended consequences that we said we're going to change this, and next thing you know, people are driving all the wrong things up there. So they've cleared that up a bit. Where am I at with the e-bike thing? I think this was a smart move. The Parks Department tried this a couple of years ago, and I think everybody will admit that it was a really poorly done study and a poorly done policy. And I think, and I'm not shooting at anybody for not doing their job well. I think they thought they were doing the right thing, and when it came out, everybody said, what about this, what about this, what about this? And everybody said, well, crap, none of this is working. So they pulled it back, and they've now spent some time working on this, trying to find a policy that allows cyclists to enjoy themselves, hikers to enjoy themselves, and comply with state law, which says we have to do this, and also not run afoul of the TOPS ordinance. And I think they've come up with a fairly decent solution here. That basically Class 1 and 2 e-bikes are going to be allowed, I think, on the urban regional trails. Class 1 will be allowed on the other trails. Let me just make sure I have that right. It is a pretty complex and long document. I will say that while we're talking about one of the other issues comes up is about enforcement.
Oh, yeah.
You can make all the rules you want, but if you don't have a method to enforcement, all I know is there was a lot of talk that there's some enforcement mechanism coming. I'll start off by saying nobody wants the park ranger to spend all their time writing something. And remember, in Colorado Springs, a park ranger is not an enforcement officer. They're mostly there to maintain and build the parks and maintain them and everything. Their first priority is not enforcement. But there's an enforcement capability coming. So I think you're going to see some kind of enforcement coming with that. And in Colorado, you can have people who are allowed to write summonses without being full-fledged police officers.
Okay.
For example, you'll see people out there who are basically civilians, but they can write tickets for people parked in handicap slots. But that's all they're allowed to do. So they're not cops. But in Colorado, you can commission a person to enforce your city ordinances. That's all they're allowed to do. I'm very specific at that. So like your parking enforcement people who... Or like, do the tickets carry the weight of... Yeah, they carry the weight. That's an official, you've been cited for a violation. You still have to answer it, even though it wasn't a police officer who wrote it. It's somebody who's been specifically authorized by the city to write summonses based on these specific offenses, these city ordinances. They can't write a ticket on a state ordinance, on a state law, because they're not... You need to be a cop to do that. So they have those. So can they give that authority to park rangers? Absolutely they can. They haven't wanted to, and they really don't want them spending all their time doing it. So obviously education is going to be the first thing. I think that if you get a ticket for writing the wrong vehicle just because you've been talked to before. So anyway, this is what's coming down the road, and I'm going to try to link to this as much as possible, and I do want everybody to see this, and if you have a comment, by all means, make your opinion heard. So here's what it's going to be. Class 1 e-bikes will be allowed on all places, on all trails in the system, including regional park and open space trails, and Class 1 and 2 e-bikes on urban regional trails. So what are the urban regional trails? It's like... Monument Valley Park and the Pikes Peak Greenway. Yeah. That's a big, wide urban trail. Cottonwood Trail. Cottonwood Creek Trail. Big, wide. That's actually a paved trail. That would be where you would be allowed to have the Class 2 e-bikes. And those are basically what we call like commuter trails. People actually in the summer, instead of taking their car, use these big trails that connect all these different neighborhoods.
I've got a bunch of friends who would do that.
Rock Island Trails, another example of that. Shook's Run Trails, another example of that. These are trails that are designed for, some of them are paved, some of them are not. They are trails that are designed for getting almost as commuters. The Santa Fe Trail, which starts, well, it actually connects all the way up in Douglas County and comes through Larkspur and the Greenland Open Space and Palmer Lake and Monument through the Air Force Academy and hooks into Colorado Springs and ends up down in Fountain, is a regional trail. So you'll be allowed to have your Class 1 e-bikes on any trail within the system. And it's basically going to be, if a bike is allowed, your e-bike's going to be allowed. And then Class 1 and 2 e-bikes on urban regional trails. And it basically, they had a task force together. This met their approach to it. The mayor has been wanting to do something with this. With an aging society, e-bike use is getting more popular. And I'm part of that aging society. I'm, 65. I'm not using an e-bike because I'm not a cyclist, but you don't want to. You have people out there who've ridden bikes all their lives. They're getting older, so maybe they can't go as far. This allows them to keep active.
Exactly.
Do you want an active, healthier society, or do you want one that said, well, I can't ride my bike, I'm going to sit at home, become a couch potato, and be a burden on Medicare and the health system? Well, obviously, you want people to be active, especially with the Class 1s. You have to pedal, or they don't do anything, so you're still working. You're still doing something. They'll have an ordinance that will define these things. And then there will be, and it's still going to take a while. If the ordinance is approved, the rules and regulations will be disseminated and roll out a policy in specific areas. The city attorney's office is going to work on enforcement procedures. That's also going to require a city code update, basically some kind of ordinance that allows park rangers and other people, whoever they designate, to write summonses on the city ordinance. And we already have the urban rangers. So we're going to have that. And they have to work to reconcile the conservation easement and other existing, like deed restrictions and stuff. They're going to have to work with those groups. So it's not going to all roll out at once. My opinion is this is the best looking, most thought out policy I've seen come out. The previous one was not very good. Now, in the newspaper, there was a comment from somebody who said, you should take more time. How much more time are we going to take? We've been working on this for years.
Yeah, you said 6 years, right?
Yeah, well, it's been a number of years. Before the pandemic, I think, or right when it started, they first rolled it out and pulled it back because it wasn't very good policy. But it's been a while. Well, how much longer are we going to wait? These e-bikes are here. We can't just keep sitting on our hands. How much longer do you want to wait? It's just smokescreen. And I will say to my counterparts at the newspaper, it'd be nice if every once in a while you heard from somebody who liked something the Parks Department did. Their quotes tend to be from the same bunch of people who don't like anything the Parks Department does. Get somebody else. And I'll say I'm a cheerleader for the Parks Department. That doesn't mean I approve everything they do. Doesn't mean I like everything they do. But I'm also not a reporter. I'm an opinion writer. So my opinion is one thing. When you're a reporter, I think you have some ethical responsibility to be a little bit balanced and not have the same people who have an axe to grind with the Park Department or something that happened 10 years ago that they're still pissed off about. So in any case, I think this is a good move. I think this is a reasonable approach. I think that there's probably going to be some tweaks. There's always going to be something you didn't think of or a hurdle you didn't see. And it's not going to all happen overnight. There's still, like I said, other codes that have to be updated, and so you may miss something. Anyway, that's what I think. Kevin, based on what you've heard, and I know you're seeing this for the first time, what's your thoughts? You think this is a smart move, a bad move? Could they tweak it? What do you think?
Oh, I think it's a very smart move. As you said, I think it's extremely important to have a definition, because people would absolutely abuse it if there's not a clear definition of what's allowed on the trails. Especially if you said a motorized something. Just the other day in downtown Springs area, I saw a guy had converted an electric scooter, or not converted, but he somehow built a folding chair on top of the electric scooter and was riding that around town. Uh-huh. It was just like, okay, I mean, technically that's allowed and stuff, but you will have more nefarious people who would abuse it. And like you mentioned, with the aging population and such, I've got friends who have been injured and got an e-bike and helped them to, as a form of rehab, to strengthen their leg muscles again, and without risk of injuring it more, on acoustic bike. And
that was subtle, Kevin. Very good. We don't have an electric bike. We have an acoustic bike.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry. That was very good.
And I think if we can allow those bikes on the trails, it opens up to so many more people being able to use them.
By the way, and they're taxpayers who pay for these trails.
Exactly. Yep. Great point. And yeah, I think I'm pretty much on the same page as you about this. I think it's very, very important to have definitions, and I just forget how complicated the layers are of all the different types of parks and deeds and easements and all ordinances.
And Colorado Springs is very unique in that way. We're probably one of the very few places in the country that have a TOPS ordinance like this. Douglas County has a county-wide one, but with specific restrictions. And since it was voter approved, it has to have voter approval to change anything. So we are very unique in that way. And it was very hard to get a lot of people to grasp that. They were all like, just make a change. We can't. But this is a way I think that works on it. So just real quickly, there's a thing here about they compared it with other jurisdictions, and I'll read this here.
Oh, good.
In Colorado, most cities allow Class 1 e-bikes on paved surfaces. And remember, that's the one you have to pedal or it doesn't go anywhere. Some allow Class 1 and 2 e-bikes on paved paths. Some allow Class 1 e-bikes on natural surface trails, but not single-track trails. Single tracks being those very narrow trails that typically, even when you're hiking, it's hard for two people to pass each other. Denver is the only city that allows all three classes of e-bikes on all types of paths and trails. Most cities do not allow Class 3 e-bikes except on streets. State parks allow Class 1 e-bikes anywhere traditional bikes are allowed. Now, I will say that in this proposed policy here, a Class 3 e-bike will be considered motorized use. So that means that if it's no motorized vehicles, it's not going to be Class 3 e-bikes. So Class 3 e-bikes are basically not going to be allowed on any of our trails or anything like this.
Okay.
And state law says, and here it is right here, the state statute says that e-scooters may not be subject to stricter restrictions than e-bikes. There is definitions of a scooter, must weigh less than 100 pounds, must have handlebars and electric motor. It is powered by an electric motor, has a max speed of 20 miles an hour on a paved surface when powered solely by the electric motor. It is not an electrically assisted bicycle. So as things have progressed, people have tried to think of all ways, because there's always going to be some idiot out there who's going to try and find a way around something.
Oh, yeah.
So they've tried to they've tried to work. And you know what? If this doesn't work, then you go back and you change it a little bit. Boise, Idaho allows Class 1 and 2 e-bikes on all greenbelt paths in the city, some use on specifically designated trail. King County, Washington allows only on paved trails, which follows their state rules, so their state's different. Arkansas allows Class 1 and 2 e-bikes wherever regular e-bikes are allowed. Local jurisdictions may choose to be more or less restrictive. I kind of wish that was the way Colorado went.
Okay.
And I don't like that they try to make a one-size-fits-all. Maricopa County, Arizona allows Class 1 and 2 on all bicycle and multi-use paths following state rules. Also allows some e-bikes in some desert parks. Now, I will say the city of Phoenix is much more restrictive, and the city of Scottsdale is more restrictive than Maricopa. Both those are in Maricopa County, but in their city parks, they're much more restrictive. In a lot of the city parks, there's no e-bikes allowed at all. Park City, Utah permits e-bikes on surf surface trails wider than 5 feet and on all paved multi-use trails. So they're keeping them out of the small single-track trails. They're trying to figure out a way. Everybody's trying to figure this out. And for years, we built multi-use trails. And now all of a sudden, we're going back to, well, we want only bike trails. We want only hiking trails. So there's going to be a shift, I think, from multi-use trails back to, these are going to, like we did in Blodgett Open Space, these are going to be bike-only trails. These are going to be hiker-only trails. There's some of those in Ute Valley Park. There's some cycling-only trails, and they're one way. The Chutes Trail in North Cheyenne Canyon Park, Stratton Open Space, is bikes only. And they built a trail next to that that's only for hikers. We're going to see more of that coming. Now, that adds cost to building these trails because now you have to build two. The National Park Service authorized the superintendent to allow e-bikes where appropriate on roads and trails where traditional bicycles are allowed, so the park superintendent can make their own rules. But this is the guidelines they have. Forest Service allows Class 1, 2, and 3 e-bikes on motorized trails and roads, but there's also, they're looking at maybe changing those. So if you can have motorized use, you can have any class of e-bike. The Bureau of Land Management, their rules are depending on location. E-bikes are allowed on trails limited to bicycles and non-motorized travel only. If a BLM manager has issued a written decision or authorizing e-bike use in accordance with applicable laws and regulations. Bureau of Land Management is a little different because some of their land is managed for agricultural and ranching, and some of theirs is managed for forestry, and some managed for recreation. So they have a wide variety of lands that they use. So obviously they have to give that manager some flexibility. Say, well, if I got cows out here, I don't want e-bikes and motorcycles running around.
Oh, yeah.
So it makes sense that they have different rules. There was a survey put out. The results that are on here, but for the most part, people were in favor of e-bikes. Now, I will say the survey was confusing because it gave you alternate 1 and 2, and people didn't know that they could say yes or no to both. So people thought they had to choose one or the other. I wish that was worded a little better, that you could say yes to both, no to both, yes to one or the other, no to one or the other, whatever. But for the most part, people, I think, are seeing that there needs to be e-bikes allowed out there, but responsibly.
Yeah.
How does that happen? That's where the enforcement thing. I've long argued that enforcement is lax because the police department doesn't have the people to do it. Or, to be honest with you, I don't think they have the desire very much to do it. The Parks Department did not have the ability to do it. There needs to be an enforcement capability, and I think there's something in the works with that. I don't know the details, but I know there's something in the works to allow there to be some kind of enforcement component to this. And obviously, you don't want them to be hard asses out there. You want them to say, hey, listen, by the way, here's the rules. Give them a pamphlet. We really need you to be over here, not over here. Here's the rules. Please, be like I tell people when I'm doing trail ambassador at Cheyenne Mountain State Park and we find somebody who's not doing what they're supposed to. We want you to be a responsible visitor to our park. Same thing here. We want you to be a responsible user of our trails and parks and open spaces. So do us a favor and work with us. And for the most part, people are like, yeah, I get it. Sorry. And, they don't do it again. If they do, and we've got a record that you've done it, we don't do that at Cheyenne Mountain, but they're looking at doing that here in the city, keep a record of the people they contact. Oh, we've talked to you 2 or 3 times about this. You're obviously not getting the message. So maybe it's now time that you have to go talk to a judge and pay a fine. Because sometimes people just, to quote a very famous movie, what we have here is a failure to communicate. So in any case, it's a thing in progress. I think you might see that this has to get tweaked a little bit as things come up. Not everybody can't think of everything. Some people are in an uproar, but I think most people are saying, finally, we have something we can look at and go back on. Did I argue that this needs to be voted on? Yes, I did. I'm not backtracking on that, but that was based on the fact that we didn't have all these definitions and very specific things. Now that we have this, I think this is a path forward. So.
And I think I currently don't own a bike, but I plan to because Bear Creek is between where I live and where I work. And it would be amazing if I could ride an e-bike to and from work through Bear Creek. Yep. But currently, e-bikes are not allowed there. And I live on top of a giant hill, so I have no desire to ride a manual bike up.
You can ride on the streets that are over there. But
the streets are nerve-wracking to me because if you don't live in the Springs, you wouldn't know. But there's 2 main routes from where I live to get to where I work, and they're very winding and narrow because they're also going down a huge hill. And there's not like half of each road has a bike lane, and then it just narrows down to none. So I would much rather prefer to ride through Bear Creek, obviously. But I just think if more people on e-bikes can use the urban trails too, that's less cars on the road, that's less traffic, that's less accidents,
less pollution, less wear and tear, less of a lot of things. You're right.
Yeah.
Right. And invariably, there's going to be somebody going to say, well, those e-bike people, why aren't they paying, taxes. Well, almost everybody has an e-bike, also has a car, so they're already paying the road taxes.
Yeah.
Get off it. I hear that all the time. I'm like, are you that dumb? And many of them live in nice houses, so they're paying their property taxes. These people are all paying taxes. Everybody who's out there are paying their taxes. They deserve the right to be able to enjoy. I'm not saying unfettered use without following rules and regulations. Yeah. That needs to be. But we have to, as a government, as a society, work as best as we can to enable anybody who pays for these parks by their taxes and stuff like that to get as much use out of them as they possibly can. Are there going to be restrictions? Yes. There are places you're not allowed to go hiking because it's a sensitive area and it's off limits. There are places you can't take your e-bike because it may be too dangerous. There are places you can't take your horses. For example, going up to the top of Cheyenne Mountain on the Dixon Trail. You can only take your bike and horses so far because after that it gets to be pretty difficult.
Oh, yeah.
There's got to be reasonable regulations, but we also have an obligation to allow cyclists and equestrians and hikers and runners and everybody else to get as much enjoyment as possible responsibly as they can. I think this is a step in that direction. Anyway, more on this to come. And Kevin dropped his mic. It's all right.
Mic drop. Okay.
Yeah, mic drop. Boom. I'm done soliloquying on that. Kevin, do you have anything you want to throw in there last minute?
No, I think I'm good.
Okay. Anything else you want to say, Kevin? We have some podcasts with some guests that are in the works. I think one is scheduled in a couple of weeks, and we're working on scheduling one that will probably be the next one. So we'll have some pretty good guests on there. Kevin's actually going to be doing an interview on his own with somebody. It's going to be a very interesting topic, and I'm kind of coordinating that with him, but it's going to be pretty interesting. Kevin, anything else you want to throw in there before we go?
I just want to say, when I was at the Maroon Bells, I didn't realize it was such a heavily tourist destination, which shows it really is like a worldwide famous place to go to. If you're going to be a tourist somewhere, please do the research on appropriate clothing and footwear. Because I know this might sound mean, but it was hilarious watching a lot of these people trying to hike from Maroon Lake, which is you walk up to it and it's manicured trails around it and stuff. But watching them trying to hike up to Crater Lake, which is more of a rugged, very, very rugged trail. And I was seeing so many people in like dress shoes and stuff. And it was just hilarious to me. But
so I'll give you a sneak preview on two things. One of which in my last newsletter that came out this past weekend, I wrote about the horrific damage from Hurricane Helene, especially in North Carolina, right where I just was in June shooting the waterfalls.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
So if you're planning on going to North Carolina, just do everybody there a favor and don't. Give them some time. Two, my column I submitted for the next edition of the Indy, I talk about that, and something we've talked about, you and I have talked about a lot before, is how many search and rescue missions are because people don't do exactly what you're asking people to do.
Yeah, yep.
And how the difference is, anything can happen to anybody. My friend, who I visited in Montrose, she fell the other day. She tripped over something and landed hard, broke a bone in her arm.
Oh.
Going to be out of work for a while. Very difficult situation for her. She's well-equipped, well-trained. Anything can happen to anybody, but the difference was she knew what to do, kept her head about her, and got herself out of that situation. I talked about my incident where I needed assistance in Colorado National Monument, and how I was prepared to spend the night. I had food, I had water, I had everything I needed. It would have not been comfortable, but it wasn't a big deal. And how many search and rescue missions are because people don't plan, prepare, equip anything, and then they end up being a search and rescue mission. In Jasper National Park in Canada, some hikers had to be rescued because they got too tired. Helicopters were sent to get them, and then it turns out they were in an area that's posted as off limits. They're facing fines of up to $25,000.
Good.
Yeah. So, and I'm not saying good because they had to be rescued. If you need to be rescued, you need to be rescued, and that's free. But when you're in a place where you're not supposed to be, and then because you're not supposed to be there, and it's posted, and then you get yourself in trouble, and now we got to come get you, that cannot be done with no consequence. There's got to be consequences to that. And I think it's time for our search and rescue organizations here in the country, in the United States, to start thinking more that when people act in a blatantly illegal manner, there have to be consequences. And you don't get a free ride anymore. If you're out there and you get lost, and you fall and you get hurt, you know what? S happens. We're going to come get you. That's going to be fine. We'll help you all day. But when you do something that's flat out illegal, no, I'm sorry, here's your bill.
Exactly.
Anyway, enough with that. And with that, Kevin, I think we'll say goodbye, and thanks for listening.
All right, we'll talk to you later.
See you guys.